I was a little worried about the topic today that it would just become a talking point instead of me being able to bring you an actual potential solution. And that kind of goes into the whole topic around where we feel our validation from. So I like to be able to provide solutions, because if I see a problem or a challenge or a roadblock or something, it's not enough for me to just lay down and accept it. Depending on who you are, you may see that as a fundamental flaw, or you may see that as a really endearing quality. But really the topic around this is how we are not just validated by the work that we do. And I know from personal experience that it can be easy to get swept up in just the work that you do, and that is where your value or your validation comes from, is by the work that you do, and only by the work that you do. And while it is important to acknowledge and recognize whatever work that it is you do and allow yourself to feel proud of it, allow others to feel proud of you as well, the challenge comes in where your why is in that, and whether it's based on external validation or internal validation. And I know the feeling as well of wanting those that you care about to feel proud of you and the work that you do. But it's also important to check in with why you're doing the work that you do first and foremost. So we'll talk about that part, and then it will turn into a conversation and hopefully a solution around how you can approach it when you find that you're seeking external validation. And maybe that's through conversations, we'll see. But when you haven't been left with anything but to focus on your work, maybe you don't have a family to tend to yet or at the moment or ever, maybe you don't have kids, or maybe you're in quarantine and that is all you can do, if not work on yourself. Or maybe that's what is just feeling fulfilling for you. There is nothing wrong with any of these things. It's really important to allow yourself to look at fulfillment and where you feel filled up in different areas. But when you start to judge your own value based on only the work that you do and not on your inherent qualities and values within you and how you are or who you are as a person, is where it can get dangerous, because then it becomes your work telling you whether or not you are of value to the world. And I could say the whole thing that everyone is valuable and everyone is valid simply because you exist. And that is true. Absolutely. It doesn't really give us anything tangible to work with in this human realm that allows us to actually wrap our heads around it beyond just that abstract concept. So sometimes there can be an issue of balance in what we're focusing on, or an avoidance in diving into our work so that we can avoid doing any work in any other areas on ourselves, in our relationships, on our health, on our whatever, that can also give us a feeling of value and validation. But if you start to notice that your validation is coming from the external rather than the internal, so with your work, for example, if you are only doing certain kinds of work, studying certain kinds of things, posting certain kinds of things in your work for the approval of someone else or others in general or specifically, or in the hopes that the feeling of certain people liking your stuff or sharing your stuff will feel good, that's an external validation factor. And again, you're allowed to feel the warm fuzzies when people like your stuff or share your stuff or comment on your stuff, whether it's in social media land or in conversation, you're allowed to feel the warm fuzzies of that, because that is a beautiful acknowledgement that the people around us can give us when we are pouring our heart and soul into things. But it's the balance of why you're choosing to do that. So I was really fortunate. I didn't have family pressures of having to be or do anything career-wise that I didn't want to. I wasn't forced into anything as far as any study or any particular kind of career. I was just told that as long as I'm happy and as long as I'm taken care of, like in my career or in my work, as long as my work takes care of me in a way that I can still live, and as long as I am happy, that's all that matters. So I was very, very fortunate in that. I didn't have that pressure. So I can't speak to what that pressure is like, of maybe being forced to study something that, because it's a lineage that has come down through generations of studying. Maybe doctors and lawyers are a big example of that, not the only example. But it comes down to, like, so there are a lot of people in the world that have become something in their work because it was expected of them, and they wanted the validation of maybe their parents, or maybe they wanted the validation of what that role or position was perceived as in society. That's all external validation. And again, I'm not shitting all over these things. It's just an important awareness that we can bring into how we make our decisions and what we focus on. And it's coming up a lot because of this whole isolation, quarantine, COVID situation where we're all at home. Our balance in other aspects of our lives isn't quite as it might be, how we'd choose it to be. So we kind of are left with less choices of how we spend our time. But the first step in when you start to feel that there's more external validation, or that you start to feel that all of your self-validation or value is placed in the work that you do in particular, and I'm speaking to both of these, but I'm speaking to that because it does show up and because I can speak to it personally as well. I've had times where I continually have to go, okay, I am proud of the work I'm doing, great, I'm allowed to be, but at the same time, am I avoiding being proud of something, like of me, just because I'm showing up in my own way? Is that where I'm placing all of my self-value? So first step is to reconnect with your why. And I've spoken about finding your why and reconnecting with your why. Simon Sinek has a great perspective book. Everything he talks about almost is about starting with your why. So whether it's what you put out there in the world, what you do through your business, or what you choose to do with your life in any aspect, whether it's work, personal, exercise, anything, start with why. Find your why and let that lead the way. So make sure that your why is strong enough, and that's what's making your decisions, not so much what other people might think. Because if I sat here and really was concerned about what certain people might think about what I put out there, I'd freeze. Because a lot of what I talk about is emotional based and it is experience based. And if I was so worried of what people would think, then I wouldn't share anything, and then I wouldn't be doing the work that I want to do and that I love doing and that actually genuinely fills me up. So reconnect with your why. Find your balance as best you can. This is the part I don't exactly have a solution because of this whole COVID situation, because everything's a little bit at the moment around our balance in our lives and what we might like for our lives. But if I can speak generally here, find your balance, and your balance will be different to someone else's. So they are things like your balance in between work, your relationships, personal, family, friends, and romantic, your exercise and your rest. I would say are probably the key 4 areas. There could be others, but find your balance. How much energy do you want to dedicate to each of those things? And they don't need to be equal, because maybe that's just not where your value set is. It can be more than what it is. One can be more than the other. If you really love your work, it can be a little bit more than something else, but make sure you know your balance based on your why. It's based on you. So find your balance. And I also talk about controlling the controllables. But the danger here again is that it can lean too far one way sometimes when we don't have any other options. So if you're in isolation and maybe you can't be going on dates with the person that you're seeing or want to be seeing, or meeting people or hanging out with friends, there are less controllables that you can control in that instance beyond a certain point, where maybe you do just dive into your work more because that's what you can control, so that's what you can do. Or maybe you do start exercising more, which is great, but also that's what you can control, that's what you can do. But sometimes those controllables can lean a little to one way, in that it causes where we feel our value to be held to land too far into that basket. So if I only have work to focus on, for example, and I can just focus on my work because, hey, I don't have to deal with this other stuff because I don't have them there right now, then there can be the risk that over time of only having my work to focus on, that all of my validation, my self-validation, goes into that work basket. So if you see that difference, so controlling the controllables is really important insofar as accepting and allowing, but at the same time, just be wary of how far your sense of self-value goes into that controllable, just because that's all you've had to focus on for a little while. And look at how you can be valid for your qualities, and just for different elements about you that don't have anything to do with what you do. So you can be valid, like I said, everyone's valid. Everyone has value to the world because they simply exist. But, you know, some of these examples, not all of them, it's not an exclusive list, but some of these examples you can be valid for how you rest, how you take care of yourself, how you show up, how you think, how you use humor to diffuse tension, how you use humor to deflect, how you go, even for your perceived flaws, how you go so internal when you're confronted with something, or how you avoid something. That you can be valid in that. You can be valid in how you try to find solutions to everything, even if people aren't wanting the solutions. It's all of these elements. You can be valid just because of the qualities that you are and the values that you show. You can be valid in anything that you do on purpose. So look, two things. Look at where you're holding your value so much in one basket, and often it will be the work basket or the exercise basket. You can hold your value in how fit or how much of a rig you are, and that is an accomplishment that you should be proud of, absolutely. But it's not where your validation or value is. Your validation or value is in you, not in what your work is only. There is value in it. So look at where your values are too far in one basket, and look at where those values or your validation is based on external validation. So doing what you're doing based on how others might perceive you rather than how you feel about you. And that is those are really important things, and they're kind of a two-step thing to just be aware of what it is you are doing with your time, with your life, with your energy, in any area, in work, relationships, exercise, rest, everything. And having a look at those things can really tell you more about your why, and more about why you're doing what you're doing, And it's just a really good check-in. It's just a really good check-in to see where you're at. Have a look at what you're doing. Have a look at why you're doing, and maybe taking care of yourself a little bit more in that, because when you do start to put all your validation into one basket, there's this pressure that builds up. There's this tension, this internal clenching that's just like, oh, this has to work because I've placed all of this validation in it. Whereas your value and your validation is simply in you.